Hi everyone! Thanks for tuning into the 17th Take, a project brought to you by the Community College of Philadelphia's Communication and Media Studies program and CCP TV studio. As college students, we're coming together to dig into the stories, experiences, and issues at the heart of Philly's people, neighborhoods, and communities. Coming to you from 17th Street and Spring Garden, in today's episode, the 17th Take crew will dig into the recent funding and infrastructure cuts facing SEPTA and unpacking what it may mean for the future of Philly's public transit system. We're talking with Philly residents, including impacted students and transit advocates, about how these changes are hitting home and what needs to be done to keep our city on track. In the summer of 2025, SEPTA announced service reductions and increased fares due to the lack of funding from the state. This decision, of course, was met with a lot of discussion and backlash. For decades, SEPTA's trolley, subway, bus, and train lines have served as a fundamental transit resource for hundreds of thousands of residents throughout southeastern Pennsylvania to get around each day. Cuts to dozens of transit routes meant that thousands of Philly residents couldn't get to work or school using public transit, leaving many delayed or unable to get to their destinations altogether. While these were recent challenges, cuts to SEPTA are nothing new. Increasing fares, long wait times, looming repairs, less safety and cleanliness, and funding cuts have made Philly transit an ongoing challenge, especially since COVID-19. While in September 2025, PennDOT allowed SEPTA to dip into their $394 million capital assistance fund to allow all SEPTA services to resume service, many Philly residents raised concerns regarding the future of public transit in and around the city. Is the future of SEPTA sustainable? What are long-term solutions to support public transportation in Philadelphia? And what do we need to do to ensure that moving forward, public transit can truly serve the public? I'd like to bring on a cast member of the 17th Take who is passionate about answering these exact questions. Richard Robinson, a current communication and media studies student aspiring to be a journalist, uses SEPTA nearly every day to attend class and get around the city. But deeper than his personal experience riding SEPTA, Richard has an interest in transit safety and how transportation infrastructure can truly grow to serve Philadelphia residents. Let's welcome Richard.
Thank you, Siani. Transit is often forgot about, but the thing is, it's always in the background even when you don't notice it, and it's still important, and you notice that as soon as it stops running.
I completely agree, especially at the beginning of the school year, an already hectic time. It was a huge challenge for so many of us since a lot of us use SEPTA.
I wrote the L just to get here.
Well, I hope it wasn't too rough of a ride. So tell us, what makes SEPTA so important to Philly and the people who live here? And more broadly, why do you think public transportation matters so much to cities in general?
Well, it's not too difficult to understand why a city like Philadelphia of such a large size would need an efficient and effective public transit network. We need to be connected. And a lot of us college students actually rely, including myself, on public transit just to get in and around the city, onto campus, etc. And we really felt the hit when the service cuts just reduced service by cutting 32 train lines and every other change that was implemented. And if you look at other educational institutions outside of colleges, you have Philadelphia Public Schools, which, according to SDP, they actually experienced 63% more latenesses and 54% more absences when the cuts were active. Even going beyond education, you'll notice that we're such a densely populated city. We rank sixth in population, but we rank almost 70th in terms of size. So we're very closely, densely populated, and 760,000 of us, according to SEPTA's most recent report in September 2025, ride SEPTA every day. That's 760,000 people that are going to pick up medicine from their pharmacy or going to jury duty because they got to select it. There's so many possibilities because all of us rely on SEPTA for our daily lives. And even looking on a grander scale, nationally, public transit agencies have received less money since the pandemic began. And since 2020, there's been a large shortfall of funding for all of these different organizations, even outside of SEPTA. But in SEPTA's case for Philadelphia, if SEPTA does not find and devise a new effective plan to counter the lack of state funding, then in 2027, all of us will feel a hit. And that really highlights the need for an investment in communities. And they need to be able to access their necessities and go about their daily lives without worrying about getting interrupted by any outside factors.
You make a lot of great points. I actually wanted to bring something up. How crazy was it when the sports gambling company FanDuel restored the Broadway Street Line Express service for just one day, just for the Philadelphia Eagles season opener?
I mean, yeah, that was crazy. I mean, prioritizing football over work and school, it just really shows where the priorities are. And it also highlights how vital it is for public transit to be up and functional because it really keeps us all connected, as I mentioned earlier. And we rarely see the support that we need for SEPTA or any public transit in and around the city, including regional rail or what have you. But it needs to be funded for it to be effective. And we don't have that.
Of course. It's a shame, really. It seems like PA lawmakers who aren't approving the budget may be disconnected from the issues affecting everyday residents who rely on SEPTA, not only in Philly but across the region. To account for some of the funding shortfall and revenue loss, SEPTA looked to everyday riders to fill the gap. SEPTA implemented a fare increase of 21.5% across all of its services, bringing the base fare from $2.50 to $2.90. This is near a 50% increase from the original $2 in November of 2024, and ties SEPTA with New York's MTA for the most expensive in the country.
I mean, and that's crazy, especially factoring in that SEPTA is more dependent on state funding than most other transit agencies. If you look at their operating budget, nearly two-thirds, 65.8%, actually stems directly from state funding, and the remaining about 34% comes from federal and state subsidies, with only 16% coming from passenger revenue, which is low compared to peer cities of New York and Boston, according to the FTA, which are at 24 and 34% in terms of passenger revenue. So it really shows how dependent they are and why it explains why it was such a big hit when the lack of state funding was announced, because SEPTA really relied on that state funding to operate and function.
Yes, and I think it's important to think about how we got here. You know, something that has really interested me in our research is the history of Philadelphia's trolley system. I was surprised to learn that Philadelphia is actually home to the largest trolley system in the U.S. and had the potential to hold the largest system in the world. However, many of Philadelphia's trolley routes have been replaced by buses, including the 15, now known as the G, the 23, and the 60. The deconstruction and replacement of these trolley routes began in the 1960s, around the time that the Philadelphia Transit Company transferred ownership to SEPTA in 1964.
And you know, that was a shocker when I found out about that too, given that I would never have thought of Philadelphia as a pioneer for public transit, but with our trolley system, that really is what we are. And even the bus routes that we have here today, they started out as trolleys for many of them, including the 61, which runs the same route as it did back in 1923 when it first opened as a trackless trolley from Center City up Ridge Avenue to Manayunk. And they still serve the same communities that they did back then today, only when they're running, of course.
That really makes me wonder what Philly can do to imagine the future of public transportation in the city. If we could be so innovative back then, what's stopping us now? With the right support and investment in place, the possibilities could be huge.
True. And if we look at the past and use that as a building block or reference, we can use that information and look ahead to the future and see what we can do to make SEPTA great.
And I think that's the perfect segue to welcome our next guest.
Transit Forward Philadelphia is a coalition based on Philadelphia-based organizations, and their goal is actually to make sure that people have accessible, sustainable, and safe public transit. Today, we have Stephen Bronskill here to introduce some of their work with this type of information. And we would actually like to ask Stephen to introduce himself very quickly and tell us a little bit about what your company does and what your organization is designed to do.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me and for laying out all that so beautifully. We're a coalition of 37 different organizations in Philadelphia, students, workers, community groups, people just trying to get around the city. And so what we spent the last year doing was trying to amplify the voices of transit riders to make sure that our elected officials were funding and supporting a system that, as you mentioned, safe, accessible, reliable, and not getting cut like we saw this year.
Mm-hmm. And I actually want you to a little bit more specifically, what is your involvement with making sure that public transit is accessible? And how have you had missions and different events to tailor to this type of issue?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll throw a question right back at you. What time do you usually take SEPTA into school?
Well, usually about mid-afternoon, so about lunch hour.
Okay, that's a good deal. So I will say a lot of our events took place at 5 or 6 in the morning, and over 300 people in Philadelphia came to this. I have no idea how. They went to train stations and bus stops all across the region, and they had ways that transit riders on their way to work or school or wherever could take action. I thought, being in Northeast Philly at 6 a.m. before coffee on a Monday morning, before school and work, I was going to get told lots of things, including go birds, right? Mm-hmm. What I actually was told by more than 90% of people was, hey, we may believe different things. We may have different backgrounds. We all have to get somewhere, and we're all taking this bus or train together. Who do we talk to keep this service? And so when we saw, as you mentioned, 32 bus lines on the chopping block, a 20% overall cut in service, 5 train lines, tens of thousands of Philadelphians and people all across Pennsylvania, part of our Transit for All PA coalition, talked with their elected officials and said, please save our service. This is an issue affecting every community in Pennsylvania and every community in America. As you mentioned, right, this is not just a Philadelphia issue. And so we heard from elected officials that this is the issue they heard from most of anything else in their careers, of riders, of folks who even just drive and don't want their commutes being lengthened, of saying, please do not cut our buses, pass a budget that includes transit funding. And so it was a privilege to, in both, canvases with riders, but also creative events, community events, engage with folks in the Philly region and help them speak up for folks who are often not at the table with decision makers to be able to make their voices heard.
Well, I'm glad that you actually brought that up because it's clear that we've had a little bit of struggle recently with the lack of bus lines that have been active, and it's just brought some challenges. And I actually want to ask about those challenges and since I know your company, your organization is relatively new at being founded less than a decade ago, have you noticed any challenges with SEPTA even from the beginning of when you launched Transit Forward Philly that have affected SEPTA?
Absolutely. I think the transit movement in Philadelphia is relatively new. And so we need new voices, new ideas, new people bringing together. I think this moment can be a catalyst, which, as you mentioned, to not just save our existing service, but to give Philly the transit it truly deserves, right? Regional rail cars that are not from 1973 that are catching on fire, buses that show up when you need them to, service that gets you to new locations, right? That connects our region and makes this the preferred and most affordable way to get around. And so I will share one piece of optimistic news in a challenging time that we live in. I'll share again, in Chicago, there are proposals that would take all of their train lines, contract them into just 2. The famous L in Chicago, we've got an L in Philly, right? Just be 2 train lines. San Francisco, an incredibly wealthy, progressive city, almost cut 80% of their service. We just cut 20% in Philadelphia. And so truly, I believe if it weren't for people speaking up and using their voices, I think we could be in an even worse position. And so, well, look, we did not fully solve this problem. We have kicked the can down the road. I think in 2025, we should be proud the can is still rolling, and it's because people use their voice. And so we're going to continue to build out this movement to make sure we win this fight for funding and these cuts don't happen again.
And it really speaks to the power of a collective. It really shows that when we put our combined efforts together and, show up when it really matters to something that we care about and something that really affects us passionately, it really has its way of showing results, and it can be effective if we all show up and play our part. I also wanted to ask you about what do you think SEPTA should prioritize when they're making these adjustments, and when it affects certain people, how do you think they should go about it and try and prioritize making these decisions?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and this is why I'm really grateful to be part of a coalition. We are going to be advocating to make sure we hold them accountable to meet those goals, to become more accessible, become safer, more reliable. One of the big challenges, right, as you mentioned, Governor Shapiro directed SEPTA, as well as our friends in Pittsburgh and their transit authority, to take their own capital funding. Look, I'm a bus rider. I'm not a budget wonk. You shouldn't have to be to get around, but SEPTA basically has 2 budgets, right? The operating budget to pay its employees to get around, and then the capital budget, which buys our vehicles, keeps them safe. We basically took from the capital budget and used that to plug the deficit in our operating. We didn't get any new money. And so the consequences of that is we're going to have buses that are older than CCP students. We're not going to buy new buses for another 3 years. We're going to put on hold a number of accessibility projects that folks with mobility devices who might use a wheelchair to get around are going to find it harder to get places. And then I believe it's over $10 billion adding to our backlog of other projects to keep our system in a state of good repair. So SEPTA's got limited chips of where to put them. What we are supportive of is they are taking measures to make our system safer, making sure that we've got more folks that are chipping in to pay the fare, also to make sure that we have a new bus network. So many folks, right, depend on the bus to get to CCP. You should be able to get here on Spring Garden without having to check a schedule, right? It should be coming every 10 minutes, and that's part of the new bus network. I don't know if you take regional rail. I know some folks do take that to get to school as well, maybe connect to a bus. There's a reimagining regional rail network where if we can get the right funding and the right implementation, instead of waiting 2 hours for a train on the weekend, that could come every 15 minutes, like many regional rail networks around the world. And so I think if we can demonstrate that the system is safe and reliable, that folks will invest in it, and we can continue to put pressure on elected officials to prioritize this.
It's very interesting and optimistic. So I'm glad that we have some sort of vision of what the future could entail for SEPTA and how it could potentially be such a positive influence on just connecting the city all around and make sure people can get where they need to get without, like you said, having to check a schedule. And my next question for you is, how does your team actually engage with local leaders and community around the city and people who also want to make sure that SEPTA serves the people that rely on it the most?
Really by listening. I think one of the things I'm most proud of this last year is people have engaged with this issue in such creative ways. The Philly Runners Alliance did a run along a canceled bus route. The Philly biking groups did a bike ride along canceled bus routes. There was a transit burlesque show someone did. There were folks canvassing Phillies and Eagles fans, right, saying, hey, you don't want to leave in the seventh inning to go home during the game because it stops at 9 p.m. I think one of the things we are doing now, and you mentioned this, is that if you are going to a $7.25 an hour job and you are paying $5.80 round trip with our new fare increase, that is not a great trade. We have one of the lowest minimum wages in the country, right? That needs to rise as well. But it shouldn't break the bank just taking the bus to get to work. And so one of the things we're working on with a number of our community organizations is a plan to save our zero fare program. Right now, City of Philadelphia subsidizes tens of thousands of SEPTA riders every year. Over 9 million trips have been taken with this program. It's amazing. If you are an access card holder, so you get SNAP or you get Medicaid or other types of assistance, you're entered in a lottery to receive a free SEPTA card. That is a lifeline that people are using right now. It is currently a lifeline that is unfunded. And so we are going to make sure our city leaders, again, listening to our community groups, hear from folks, that our council members, that our mayor, make sure that we preserve this really vital anti-poverty program that, again, helps thousands of people get to work every day.
We would like to leave our viewers with some ideas of how they can get involved and what we can envision for the future of our city's transit.
I think three things. If you are a student here at CCP, one of the programs that SEPTA provides is called the UPass program. It provides free transit benefits to get to school. It's a program that is subsidized through the school. This is also something that employers do through something called Key Advantage. If you are working at an outside organization, that is something that you can contact SEPTA and find ways to get discounted or free transit to work. This is something that we can organize around, right? We don't need any state legislator to do something for us. We can talk to our fellow students, our colleagues at work, the folks in our community who make those decisions, and making sure that everyone has an accessible way to get to work or school. And so there are efforts here at CCP to organize around that. I would encourage you to join it to make sure that, again, no matter how you get to school, that everyone has that freedom of mobility. Second, as I mentioned, around zero fare. Councilmember O'Rourke has proposed the Transit Access Fund. That is something that gets through the City Council, will be a vote of the people of Philadelphia. It does not raise anyone's taxes or generate any new money, but it just says a portion of our city budget needs to be allocated so that the most vulnerable people in our community have the freedom to get around, and that zero fare program is preserved. So we're strongly in support of that. Would encourage you to contact your local elected officials, your council member, the mayor. And then finally, we are, as we sit, over 100 days late on our state budget. We are the only state in the nation without a budget. I hope when this comes out that that's not the case. But we got another one due in 8 months. I know that at CCP, if you don't finish your assignment in 120 days, you're probably not passing the class, right? Our state elected officials need to get back to work. They have not solved this problem, and they need to continue to prioritize funding transit with a long-term solution. And so this is an opportunity, right? Whether you drop by their office, whether you send them an email, whether you give them a phone call, whether you come with us to a rally or to a lobby day in Harrisburg, make your voice heard. Again, whether you take SEPTA or not, it is a critical way that moves our community, that connects our community, and is something that Philly just wouldn't be Philly without. And so we welcome you to join us at Transit Forward Philly. Please get involved. We need your voice. We want you to be a part of this movement. And together, we're going to win this fight.
We can fight to make sure Philly residents have access to public transit and that they can count on it. To any SEPTA riders or anyone passionate about making sure Philly Transit stays on track, you can visit transitforwardphilly.org to learn more and make a difference today. Thanks for tuning in to the 17th Take. We hope today's conversation made you think, smile, or see Philadelphia from a new angle. If you liked what you heard, make sure to follow us, share, and keep the conversation going. Until next time, I'm Siani Strickland with the Community College of Philadelphia's Communication and Media Studies program and CCP TV studio. And this has been the 17th Take, where conversation meets perspective and awareness meets action.